I recognize now the former Deputy Speaker, the Chairman of the Constitutional Amendment, Congressman Rufus Rodriguez. Sir, you are now recognized.
Thank you very much, our Deputy Speaker, the Honorable Gonzales. I would like to greet also our Speaker of the House of Representatives, Martin Romualdez, President of the Philippine Constitution Association. My esteemed colleagues, my special guest, the Vice Mayor of Cagayan de Oro, my sister, Vice Mayor Jocelyn Bebot Rodriguez, my daughter, Attorney Regine Rodriguez, and also the delegation of the Vice Mayor's office. My dear colleagues, it is my deep honor and pride to sponsor resolution of both houses number 6. Resolution of both houses number 6 calls for a constitutional convention to propose amendments to or revision of the 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines as contained in Committee Report number 323. This was adopted by the Committee on Constitutional Amendments with an overwhelming vote last Monday, February 20, 2023. Grit, or the power of passion and perseverance, keeps the House of Representatives focused on its mandate to pursue constitutional reforms for the last 24 years, despite the challenges and bad perception in some quarters. Why this sustained effort? Why have this chamber kept on and plowed through the years of study, listening to experts, consulting the people, and deliberating in the committee and plenary on day's end? The compelling reason, Mr. Speaker, is that this institution cannot turn its back from the truth and reality that the 1987 Constitution needs to be reviewed, for it is the third most restrictive in the world, and the most restrictive in ASEAN. Its inflexibility and restrictiveness hampers foreign investments, FDIs, to come in as much as they do in other countries. And the fact remains, Mr. Speaker, as was pointed out by the representative of the Management Association of the Philippines, an association of 1,100 member executives of the Philippines, listed local and multinational companies, that it is only us in Congress which can do this in the exercise of our constituent function reposed upon the Constitution under Article 17, Sections 1 and 2. That is to either propose amendments by itself or call for a constitutional convention to do the same. Let me present to you now, my dear colleagues and the Filipino public, the following data, and some of them have come from the House of Representatives economic think tank, the CPBRD. The Philippine Situationer right now reveals that it has, you can see the screen now, it has a GDP of 7.6%, the highest in the past many years in 2022. It has a total deficit of 1.2 trillion as of the end of November 22, a total outstanding debt of 13 trillion at the end of November 22, an inflation rate of 580% in 2022. January this year is now at 8.7. Budget deficit of 2.23 billion and national debt of 13.64 trillion. Furthermore, businesses closed during the pandemic, which totaled to 14,144. So much so that underemployment in this country registered at 6.16 million Filipinos, an increase of 14.4%. And unemployment at 2.18 million, an increase of 4.20 from the previous year. Mr. Speaker, while we are on the way to recovery, our ASEAN neighbors, notably Vietnam, are already way ahead of us in economic performance. Inflation and fiscal deficits are among the highest in the region, as well as the number of businesses closed. If we are to catch up, we need more FDIs to come in. Now, look at this graph. The yellow is the Philippines. Very small amounts of foreign direct investments. We are not among the highest in the ASEAN. The highest so far since the 2010s is Vietnam, and that is why it's almost overtaking us. Number 2 is Malaysia. Next is Thailand, Indonesia, and China. The Philippines is nowhere to be seen in this amounts of investments coming to the country. The FDI, despite the efforts of Congress to address the inimical economic situation of our country, the Philippines' FDI regulatory restrictiveness hampers the flow of much-needed foreign investments. We now have the graph coming from the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. 2020, it shows that the Philippines, Mr. Speaker, is the most restrictive in terms of foreign equity capital because they are enshrined in the Constitution. Look at the graph. The orange, the highest there is the Philippines, and then followed by Indonesia and the other countries. We are the most restrictive country in Asia on this particular FDI's restrictiveness because of our Constitution. FDI standing among ASEAN countries show that since the 1980s till the 2010s, the Philippines remains to be behind its neighbors as shown in this graph. It is not among the top 5 countries that attracts foreign investors. Mr. Speaker, I cannot overemphasize the fact that despite the passage of structural reforms to liberalize the economy in the last administration on the amendments to 1, the Retail Trade Liberalization, 2, amendments to the Foreign Investment Act, and 3, the Public Service Act, the reality is that constitutional limitations, Mr. Speaker, countervenes the objectives of these laws. The statements and position papers coming from the business sector during the public consultation show that those amendments, according to them, are not, I repeat, are not sufficient. For instance, the Joint Chamber of Foreign Industries, or Foreign Chambers of the Philippines, which is a conglomeration of 7 chambers of commerce, laud the Congress for acting to liberalize the domestic economy in order to increase investment and job creation, more employment opportunities, but they contend that Congress has yet to amend the foreign equity restrictions in the Constitution. And we have here the recent structural reforms. Those are the 3 bills. However, for example, we should consider that in this particular case, the Constitution itself, which is the fundamental law, must conform to and be able, not the other way around, meaning unless and until the constitutional restrictions are removed, the apprehensions and hesitancy on the part of the investors will consequently remain. It is also well known, we have one of those liberalizing bills that we have in laws. But it's well known that the consumer group has filed a petition in the Supreme Court of the Republic of the Philippines questioning the constitutionality of the Public Service Act. The High Court also recently ruled that the joint marine seismic undertaking among the Philippines, Vietnam, and Vietnam and China is unconstitutional as it went against Section 2, Article 12. In other words, the Supreme Court said, even pre-exploration by the Chinese in our joint marine exploration undertaking, that is considered exploration, and it is The Constitution requires 60-40 in the exploration, exploitation, and development of natural resources, Article 12, Section 2. Another illustration is the 8-year-old case of Piatco. What happened to Piatco? Here it showed what constitutional restrictions have done to business in our country. It resulted in adverse selection problems, according to the National Scientist on Economics, Dr. Raul Fabella, and there were questions on why they were the ones. They effectively had 64% with their dummies, and the Supreme Court found that. Mr. Speaker, in contrast to this malady, a solution was posed by Chairman Joey Salceda in his study submitted to the committee during the last Congress. In its dynamic stochastic general equilibrium, DSGE, opening up the economy, as you can see there. Opening the economy will result to 500,000 jobs in 2023. 500,000 jobs, 500,000 employment opportunities to our Filipinos if we are able to have a very liberal opening of our economy. If there is such a solution to unemployment and lack of jobs, why can't it be given the proper implementation? To cap this evidence-based recommendation from the experts, the World Bank, here we go, that's the World Bank. The World Bank top 10 policy prescriptions in the world. What is that? It says there, it includes restrictions, reduced restrictions on foreign investors. That is the recommendation of World Bank. So this is what is in the report and their top policy prescription, reduce restrictions on foreign investors. The movement towards constitutional change has always been relevant. However, for the genuine constitutional reforms to have taken a backseat because of mistrust and unfounded perceptions that a constitutional reform will only benefit those who are in power. Filipinos, meanwhile, take severe punishment from corruption, high prices, inequitable distribution of income, and a lopsided playing field when it comes to foreign investments. It has been pointed out time and again that the 1987 Constitution contains numerous restrictions against the flow of foreign capital in specific areas of economic activities. Although the restrictions on foreign ownership are designed to prioritize Filipino citizens, it is noted, however, that the country sorely lacks the requisite capital to boost our economy and develop our natural resources. It is high time, Mr. Speaker, to liberalize such restrictions in order to encourage the free flow of capital in the country and pave the way to global competitiveness. As your Committee of Constitutional Amendments, we report to you the result. It's not very clear, but anyway, I can give the summary here. During the committee here, we report to you the result of deliberations on 7 public consultations conducted by the committee, 3 in-house hearings for the National Capital Region, and 4 nationwide regional constitutions in Luzon. It will show here the overwhelming vote and opinion to have constitutional changes now. And the selected mode is through a constitutional convention. During the committee deliberations, the resource persons answered the following issues raised before them. Number 1, are you in favor of amending the Constitution now? If in the affirmative, what is your preferred mode? Constituent Assembly or Constitutional Convention? And 3, what are your proposed amendments, if any? Mr. Speaker, constitutionalists and legal experts, former Chief Justice Renato Puno, former Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Vicente Mendoza, former Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice Adolf Ascuna, are in favor of amending the Constitution. Also, the position paper and the representative of PhilConsa, the Philippine Constitutional Association, are in favor of amending the Constitution. For the business sector, we heard them because they're the ones supposed to be protected by the restrictive provisions of the Constitution. They're the ones that are supposed to be protected. Mr. Speaker, almost all the business sector representatives, business sector, large business organizations like the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, represented by its President George Barcelon, the Management Association of the Philippines, represented by Attorney Perepe, and the Foundation of Economic Freedom, represented by Mr. Calixto Chiquiamco, are all in favor of lifting the restrictive provisions of the Constitution. On the other hand, from the academe, the economists, the political scientists, and think tank groups, Dr. Gerardo Sicat, Professor Emeritus of the UP School of Economics, Dr. Raul Favela, also from UP School of Economics, international lawyer, Attorney Anthony Abad, Professor Edmund Tayaw, Dr. Clarita Carlos, and former Secretary of Finance Margarito Teves, Dr. Aniceto Orbeta, Junior President of the Philippine Institute of Development Studies, represented by Dr. Navarro and Attorney Homel Reville of the Constitutional Reform Movement, are all in favor for constitutional change, especially on economic amendments. Lastly, pertinent government agencies also expressed their support on the initiative of the committee to review the economic provisions, such as the Department of Foreign Affairs, through Undersecretary Carlos Soreta and Assistant Secretary Domingo Nolasco, the DILG, through Undersecretary Juan Victor Liamas, the Board of Investments Governor, the NEDA, through Undersecretary Crystal Tanuy, the Department of Agriculture, through Assistant Secretary Jane Bacayo, and the Department of Social Welfare and Development, through a former colleague, Undersecretary Nina Taduran. They are in favor of amending the Constitution, especially the economic provisions. We also take note, Mr. Speaker, that some prominent reactors are also against the amendments, because in our public hearing, we allowed all in the spectrum, political spectrum, economic spectrum, all were invited to be able to present their opinion and position on these three questions. These are those who voted against and gave their views against amendments. They are the following: former colleague of Congress, Attorney Nery Colmenares; former colleague of Congress, Rafael Mariano, Chairman, Kilusang Magbubukid ng Pilipinas; former Congressman Antonio Tinio; former Congressman Fernando Capando Hicap, head of the Pambansang Lakas ng Kilusang Mamalakaya ng Pilipinas, Mamalakaya; constitutionalist, lawyer, former chairman of a Constitutional Commission, Attorney Christian Monsod; School of Economics Professor Emeritus Dr. Solita Collias Monsod; Professor of Law, Attorney Howard Calleja; UP Political Science Chair, Dr. Aris Arugay; and Ms. Jandel Roperos, President of the National Union of Students in the Philippines. In summary, Mr. Speaker, this committee was able to gather the pertinent data on the three issues raised from all the sectors, from both in-house and out-of-town public consultations, from the respondents who answered the survey questionnaires during the out-of-town consultations, and from those who submitted written position papers upon request of the committee. The result shows, Mr. Speaker, that out of 552 reactors and respondents, 424, or 77%, are in favor of amending the Constitution. 109, or 20%, are against it, and 19, or 3%, abstain. In the mode preferences, 226%, or 41%, are for Constitutional Convention, 91, or 16%, are for Constituent Assembly, and 77, or 14%, are for People's Initiative, the third mode of amending the Constitution. and 158 expressed their no preference at 29, no preference of which mode will be used. For those who answered in the affirmative, those who are saying that there should be a constitutional change now, 310 or 56% of them favor economic amendments, while only 24 or 4% favor political amendments, and 38 or 7% wants both, and 180 or 33% have other proposed amendments outside the economic and the political provisions. It is also noteworthy to underscore that in the presentation and analysis of data in the liberalization of the economy, it will boil down to experts' opinion against experts. In the 18th Congress, one of our in-house economists, now the senior vice chairperson of the Committee on Appropriations, the Representative Estela Kimbo, wrote to then chairperson of the Committee on Constitutional Amendments on February 2, 2021, and has submitted a list of literatures. She wrote in part, and I quote Congresswoman Stella Kimbo, "We cannot turn a blind eye on the overwhelming scientific evidence in support of trade and investment liberalization. As a practicing economist, I found it essential to undertake a review of literature and examine the global evidence. Here's a summary of what I found," and this is included also in the annex of this speech. 122 out of 167 journal articles in peer-reviewed international journals, 122 out of 167, show that liberalization has a positive impact on the economy. The literature implies that a more liberal policy will increase our capital, increase our productivity, increase government revenue, increase employment, increase imports and exports, and increase GDP growth rate. So aside from literatures and expert opinions, the committee heard and listened to the sentiments from the grassroots, Mr. Speaker, my esteemed colleagues. This is the rationale behind the calling of the Constitutional Convention contained in RBH number 6. For the information of my colleagues, the same procedure was adopted in the 1971 Constitutional Convention when Congress first passed Resolution number 2 on March 16, 1967, which was subsequently implemented by the approval of Republic Act 6132 on August 24, 1970. In other words, like what we're doing now, we are now having deliberations on the resolution of both houses. Then a companion bill which now lays down the rules, qualifications of the elections and the budget will also come within this period that we have. The calling for a constitutional convention where delegates shall both be appointed and elected by the people simultaneously with the next barangay, sanggunian, and kabataan elections on October 30, 2023 is a mode that is intended to be more transparent, more democratic, and less divisive. The convention is mandated through a process of public hearings and deliberations to submit the proposed charter change for the people's ratification, which will not be held earlier than 60 days nor later than 90 days upon approval of the amendments or revisions, and the same shall be valid only when ratified by a majority of the votes cast. As to the procedure of the calling of a constitutional convention, Article 17, Section 3 of the Constitution and Rule 21, Section 146 of the House Rules says, the Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of all its members, can call a constitutional convention, or by a majority vote of all its members, submit to the electorate the question of calling such a convention. Further, Section 21, Rule 21, Section 145 of the House Rules likewise provides, proposals to amend or revise the Constitution shall be by resolution which may be filed by any time by any member. The adoption of resolutions proposing amendments to or revision of the Constitution shall follow the procedure for enactment of bills. First, we have first reading of all of these measures. Now we are on second reading. It goes to third reading. Nevertheless, such resolutions should be implemented through the passage of a bill. There has to be a companion bill containing the corresponding appropriation and other details relating to the election of delegates, the specific apportionment per district, and the holding of the Constitutional Convention itself, among others. That is why we have filed two measures. One, for the calling of the Constitutional Convention, which is now this RBH, and one as an implementing measure, which is a House bill. As a rule, appropriations shall be made through the enactment of a law. Thus, the implementing measure should be contained in a bill because only a bill can become a law as enunciated in the case of NARS versus Executive Secretary, GR number 215746, October 2019. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, the 1987 Constitution was ratified by the people through a plebiscite on February 2, 1987. It has been 37 years since its adoption, and several developments in our society and the global arena had happened. The passage of time and the present social and economic realities render its certain parts less responsive to our people's needs. It is important, Mr. Speaker, that constitutional reforms be completed through a transparent process that ensures the participation by the nation at large, and keeping with the sovereign mandate of the people, the new Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines should be truly reflective of the ideals and aspirations of the Filipino nation and not just a select few. In view of the foregoing, Mr. Speaker, let us pass RBH number 6 for a hybrid constitutional convention. Let the voices of the people be heard and our mandate fulfilled. We have gone through this as an institution for the last 3 decades. We can do this again now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, my esteemed colleagues. God bless the Philippines.